right now, what I'd like to do is bring on two people that I work with at ASI who are as good as it comes with their area of expertise. And as our world grows increasingly more complicated, stronger cybersecurity is essential. And right now we have with us two of ASI's tech experts with advice and tips for beefing up your online security and just keeping everybody as buttoned up as possible. First, we have my friend here, Seth Kusiak, who is ASI's Vice President of Infrastructure and Security Services. And Seth is as good as it gets as keeping companies safe from all sorts of cyber attacks. And with him will be Jason Kuttner, our Executive Director of Technical Services. And below Jay and Seth, you'll see the downloads for their presentation and a handy handout that they put together that is so helpful that you guys can download. So their knowledge base is, the best of everybody. So without further ado, I give you Seth and Jay Kuttner. Hi, guys.
Hi. Thank you, Michelle.
You're welcome.
All right. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. With the ever-increasing cybersecurity threats in the world today, it's more important than ever to take necessary precautions to protect yourself and your business. Unfortunately, we see headlines all too often on this topic. So today, we'll provide 5 important tips for improving your security posture. We're also going to discuss security assessment resources for helping evaluate your cyber risk. In addition, we have 2 polls that are relevant for today's topic. Please feel free to ask questions during our presentation, and we'll be glad to review them during the session. So let's get started with the first poll. The question is, who is responsible for security at your organization? Please check your screen in the upper right-hand corner. You should see the poll options. We'll give folks some time to enter their info, and we'll circle back in just a moment to discuss the results. Now, let's get started with our first important tip. Seth, over to you.
Thank you, Jason. Tip number 1, enable MFA everywhere. MFA is multi-factor authentication, and both Google and Microsoft both agree that MFA stops 99% of account takeovers that are all too common. Places to enable: make sure your email accounts, your social media accounts, your remote access and VPN, remote desktop protocol, your cloud services, your internal access and remote access to servers, network devices, as well as Active Directory. If there's anything that you take away from our talk today is, as leaders, to understand where you stand with MFA. It is extremely important that you have it enabled, especially on your email accounts and remote access VPNs. Attackers, know all the companies that don't have it enabled, and they actively go after them. So extremely important.
Thank you, Seth, for explaining this important information. And now, sorry, quick question for you before we go to the poll. I have an important follow-up question to ask. Can you please explain to our attendees how MFA was mandated by our insurance?
Yeah, so the insurance companies have been hit very hard with payouts due to ransomware attacks and other cyber breaches. So many of the insurance companies are now mandating MFA as a prerequisite of a company getting an insurance policy. It kind of ranges depending on what insurance carrier you have. Some require it just on your email accounts. Some also require it on your VPN and remote access. And others require it, the full gamut of, your internal and remote access to servers, network devices, as well as Active Directory. So my advice would be, to reach out to your insurance brokers and find out what MFA requirements are. More importantly, make sure you understand where your company sits with having MFA enabled everywhere.
Thank you, Seth. I appreciate you explaining that. So let's take a quick look at our poll results. So the question is, do you have an established security program at your organization? So looking at the results, Seth, about 36% of the audience has a dedicated security team, 26% general IT system administrators. We have about 13% for outsourced, 13% for unsure, and around 10% with no one. So we've got a heavier section towards dedicated security and general IT, making up over 50% of the results. What are your thoughts on that, Seth?
So that's actually really great to hear that 33% of our attendees have dedicated security staff. The vast majority of organizations don't have security staff, or they don't have any staff that is, equipped to handle security issues. So that's really great that we're way ahead of other industries in that regard. So definitely happy to hear that.
Okay, thank you, Seth, for explaining that. Seth, I have an important question to ask you. Some of our attendees may be wondering, how can their organizations own security? Sorry, how can our attendees may be wondering about their organization's own security posture? Can you please provide details on how organizations can assess their own security posture?
So sure. Having an assessment done is one great way of having a to understand what your security posture is. We're actually going to go over that a little bit more later in our presentation here. So I'd like to hold off and further explain when it comes to that time.
Sure, Seth, completely understood. Okay, bear with me a moment here, and hang on, let me just catch up. Okay, so Seth, at this point, let's continue on to the additional tips, and we'll look for audience questions.
So sure. So tip number 2, install antivirus and anti-malware software. Ensure all of your endpoints, servers, laptops, desktops have antivirus and anti-malware software, and that your definitions are automatic and updated frequently. And if you're a medium or larger size organization, your endpoint protection needs to include what's known as an endpoint detection and response, or EDR platform. These platforms are much more advanced in helping you protect your environment, as well as detect attacks in your environment and to respond to those attacks. There are a lot of great vendors out there: Microsoft, Sophos, CrowdStrike, and as well as others that make platforms, EDR platforms that are very well equipped to help you in your improving your endpoint security. And Mac users, this includes you too. In the past, Mac users were kind of informed that they didn't need to worry about viruses and malware on their computer, and that's absolutely not the case. I know our industry is filled with a lot of creative individuals that use Macs, and it's important that their devices are kept up to date with antivirus and anti-malware software as well. Number 3, implementing vulnerability and patch management. So you want to make sure that all of your devices, whether it's servers, desktops, laptops, network devices, are kept current with security updates. And this is extremely important because the time that it takes for a vulnerability to come out, where threat actors are now acting upon that and making exploits that are compromising companies, that time frame has gotten very short. So it's extremely important that you're prioritizing your patches, especially critical ones that impact your environment. It's important to know the end date for security updates for your software and your hardware, and that you're making sure that you have plans to replace or remove hardware or software that's no longer receiving security updates. And I think everyone is well aware of all the supply chain issues impacting delivery times. So it's important to plan. If you have hardware especially that is coming on its end of life that you need to replace, you want to start making sure that that you're placing your orders early, because some equipment is being back ordered 3, 6. We've even heard some things being delayed up to a year. So you want to make sure that especially with critical network devices, servers, that you're replacing those and getting those orders in early. It's also important to make sure that you actually read the security advisories provided by your software vendors. Sometimes it's not enough to just patch. Sometimes you have to take additional guidance, follow additional steps in order to protect your environment. And sadly, what happens, some organizations, they'll apply a patch, but they don't read the instructions and say, well, you also need to do these other steps in order to fully ensure that you're remediated from a particular vulnerability. And then kind of a bonus tip here is, how do you know what to patch in your environment? How do you know what's critical and whatnot? And this is extremely important. It's a basic, but that's asset management. to really know what systems you have in your environment, know the software, the versions, so that when advisories come out, you're able to determine, I'm impacted by this. I need to prioritize getting, these things patched. So it is a basic tenet, but a lot of organizations don't do asset management, and the ones that do don't always do it right. So it's important that you really understand what's in your environment so that you can protect it.
Seth, a quick audience question. At this time, what concerns you the most about security right now?
Well, there's a lot that concerns me about security, but what's keeping me up at night is the level of sophistication these threat actors have. And they're really, they really have advanced their capabilities. They've invested a lot in automation. They've invested a lot in their own supply chains, where they have other threat actors, maybe compromising an environment and then selling that access to ransomware gangs, where then they go in and they deploy their tool chains to inflict, damage into an environment. And what's really crazy about this is that, these threat actors, they can go onto the dark markets, and they can buy a 0-day vulnerability for $1 million. A 0-day vulnerability is it's a vulnerability in software where there's no patch. Well, they can drop $1 million on that vulnerability because they know that they can get high return on investment. They can get 2 to 5 times easily. Imagine spending $1 million, investing $1 million, and you get $5 million in return. Who wouldn't love that? And these threat actors know that, and they're taking advantage of it. So the sophistication is really what concerns me the most definitely.
Thank you, Seth. Let's continue on with the additional tips.
Sure. So tip number 4 is ensure your critical systems and data are backed up and recoverable. So it's important to follow the 3-2-1 rule, and that is 3 copies minimum of your data, and that includes 1 primary and 2 backups. 2 different storage medias, whether it's tape, cloud, external storage devices, etc. 1 copy of your data must be stored in an off-site location, such as a cloud or a secure storage facility. It's also important to make sure that your data, your backups are encrypted, both at rest, so backing up of encryption of your media, as well as in transit. So if you're sending your data to the cloud, making sure that that's going over an encrypted channel. And a pro tip is to use immutable backup storage where possible. What immutable backups are, quite simply, is really a policy that says that you would put on these types of devices or cloud services, that says my data can't be deleted, for X number of days. Say it's 30 days. And why that's important is what these ransomware, attackers are doing is, well, not only are they encrypting your data, but they're also going after your backups and destroying them because they want a payout. Well, when you have a immutable backup solution, it is much more difficult for them to be able to harm that data and to delete it. So that makes recovery a little bit easier for your organization when you have immutable backups. The other thing that's important is, if you're sending your data, your backups to the cloud, you should understand what it's going to take to recover from the cloud. So a lot of times when you're seeding your backups, your backups are basically, running over the course of a month, and they finally get caught up and they're sitting in the cloud storage. Well, if you ever have to recover from the cloud, how long is that going to take? You might not have the bandwidth to be able to restore quickly based on what your objectives are. So it's important that that you're testing your backups, because backups are meaningless unless you can restore them, and you should understand what the impact is on restoring. What is that time to recover from them?
Thank you, Seth. Let's go on to the next tip.
So tip number 5 is to create a culture of cyber readiness. So security needs to be part of every organization's culture. Really, how do you get started? That's a kind of a big undertaking for a lot of organizations. How do we get started in this? And the CISA, which is the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, created what's known as Cyber Essentials. And Cyber Essentials is broken down into bite-sized elements that make it easy to get started and provides leaders with actionable guidance and supporting resources, for their business. And what's nice about this is that this is very much a basic, starting point, but it aligns with more comprehensive security frameworks that you can grow into. So here I have, this is an outline of the Cyber Essentials. And just by the way, I understand that this is kind of small and hard to read. We're just going to glance over this. But we're posting this handout, below the screen with the attachments. And we're including a link to a starter kit, which is 15 pages on the details of each of these elements. So if we kind of glance in here, and I'll go over this kind of briefly because it does take some time to go into it, is that these 6 elements are yourself. And when we say yourself, this is the leader. And it really provides a couple things. Actions. Actions are for leaders. So if we look at the blue check marks here, these are items that a leader needs to be, needs to take action on. And the black check boxes are discussions with IT staff, your security staff, or service providers. So, the program gets into, yourself, the leader, staff, developing security awareness and vigilance, understanding and protecting your systems, understanding your surroundings, things like leveraging multi-factor authentication, using unique passwords, developing, IT policies and procedures, as well as your data, making sure, we just talked about backups, making sure that your backups are available and that you have them for your critical systems, as well as what your crisis response is. What happens, if you are, you are breached and your operations are impacted, what is your crisis response? So what's great about this is that each of these items are broken down in the starter kit, and it provides, not only the bullet points for a leader to kind of act on, but it provides other resources to, help you get started.
Well, thank you, Seth. And these are definitely excellent tips. And this is a great reminder of things that can be done today to increase your security. As Seth mentioned, MFA and two-step authentication is without a doubt a critical feature to enable on all your personal and business accounts. If you haven't already, please don't hesitate to enable this important security feature. So we're going to go and take another poll at this time. This is our second poll. And the question in this poll is, do you have an established security program at your organization? And if you could please help us, check again in the upper right-hand corner and post your results. And we'll come back in a little while to discuss those results. So Seth, we're going to circle back to that original question about, we know some of our attendees are going to be wondering about how their organizations own, how can they firm up their own security posture? Can you please provide details on how organizations can assess their own security posture?
Yeah, so I'm providing a couple of items here for guidance. One is the Cybersecurity Evaluation Tool, CSET for short, and that is by CISA. And that helps an organization assess their cyber risk. It's a free tool for organizations of all sizes, but it's going to most benefit smaller and medium-sized organizations. With that said, it does require, knowledge of your IT systems, and it guides you through a series of questions, and it really helps you identify risks in your organization that can help you prioritize, and then ultimately remediate those risks in your environment. Another resource is, and this is free for organizations for less than 500 employees and 100 million in revenue, which is a Verizon security assessment. And that's it's an assessment that's done using publicly available information about your network, security configurations, risks, and some other criteria. You don't have to provide Verizon with anything other than your domain name. and they'll go and they'll write what essentially looks to be like a FICO score to rate your security, your organization's security from the outside looking in. In addition to that, in the handouts, we are including resources for secure baselines that covers all major operating systems, network devices, and cloud services. So those are really a great set of reference points to review, see how your own environment stacks up to some best practices when configuring your system. The other item is that I'm actually a very strong believer in this, are paid assessments. And these are, what they are is they're guided third-party security maturity assessments with a security vendor. And these are very valuable to get external perspective into your security posture. And they know the right questions to ask based on your business. And they can help you prioritize a security strategy for that's tailored to your organization. Now these aren't free. They can generally run in the low to mid tens of thousands, and all the way up depending on the size of your organization.
Thank you, Seth, for all those details. Great information. So let's review the poll question at this time. The question is, do you have an established security program at your organization? So this is good news to hear. 70% said yes, Seth, and 22% said no, so strong towards yes, and 7% said I don't know. So Seth, what are your thoughts on those results?
So it's really great to hear that the high percentage of organizations that have established programs. Kind of going back to the insurance question, when we went through our liability insurance renewal process, I was interviewed by a risk panel team, and really a lot of the things that they dug into. Number one was about multi-factor authentication, but they really started to go into the details about an overall security program. So if your organization doesn't have a security program, it's really a great time to start looking to implement one. And we provided some resources as starting points, but we're also happy to help out if there's any questions that we can answer from our viewers who might, or our attendees that might have questions on where to get started or might have some other questions.
Yeah, thanks for that feedback, Seth. We actually do. As we head towards the end, we're going to wrap up with a few audience questions. So quick question, Seth. How likely is it that my company or any small business would get hacked?
So, I think what's important to understand is that an organization of any size, whether you're a one or two person, organization, all the way up to your multinationals, anyone could be the victim of a security incident. And what some people don't understand is that you don't have to be directly targeted to be impacted by a security incident. Your software that might have a vulnerability that could ultimately result in you getting compromised. We saw that a lot over the summer with various exploits in Exchange. For example, or the SolarWinds exploit that happened, late last year. So you don't have to be directly targeted to be, impacted. But having security awareness, enabling MFA really helps greatly reduce the possibility. But you're never going to eliminate the possibility. Not even the best security organizations in the world. Microsoft and the NSA, for example, have been breached. That should tell you something. Microsoft spends billions of dollars on security in their organization, and the NSA is the NSA, some of the brightest minds in the world. So it's important to keep that in mind. But focusing on the basics that we mentioned today really help greatly reduce that possibility.
Thanks, Seth. And this next question kind of ties into that comment you just made, and we'll make this the last question. How does cloud impact an organization's security?
So that's a great question. So when we made the business case to move to the cloud, security was one of the top reasons. But it's important to understand the reason for that is because the tool provides a lot of tools to help better secure your environment. But there's also what's called, the shared responsibility model when you're talking cloud. And what that means is that the cloud provider has a certain set of responsibilities. You as the customer have a set of responsibilities, and then there's also shared responsibilities. So, the cloud provider is not fully responsible for your security. They're a part of the solution, and they can provide a lot of great tools. But ultimately, your business is responsible for the security of your organization. So leveraging the cloud is great. We have done it. There's been a lot of things that are made available much more quickly than a traditional on-premise environment. But yeah, when we're talking about the cloud, it's there is shared responsibility.
Thank you so much, Seth, for all this amazing information.